Good evening, ladies.
Good evening.
All right, we are live.
Good evening, everyone. This is Corinthia Benison, founder of Renaissance Center of Mastery. And thank you for joining us this evening. It is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I'm happy to have a guest who to come on and discuss the importance of mental health. So please just introduce yourself to everyone and let everyone know where you're from and what you do.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bailey Jeremy, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm currently in the Harlem neighborhood of New York, and I'm originally from Chicago. And I also spent about a decade in Atlanta. So I've rooted in a few different places, but mental health is my mission.
Perfect. Likewise, and I'm a familiar face now on the Black USA News Network. Thank you, Donnie Glover, again for letting me use this platform to discuss mental health. I recently founded a nonprofit, Renaissance Center of Mastery. I'm native of Harlem, and it's so important right now to be offering services and trying to help and heal the community, the underserved community of Harlem. So I'm just happy to be using this platform to just get our voices out, and talk about pressing issues facing the community and how we can bring about change and how we could change the narrative in the course of the future with offering immediate solutions to a growing problem in our community. So let's kind of just get into it. I mean, we definitely have to talk about, health equity and mental health and just access to services. So my question to you, Bailey, is what is your perspective on health equity and what solutions should, we be looking to implement?
So I'm in a very, what I would say, not a unique. Well, I guess it is unique to be a Black mental health provider, but
Yes,
um,
it is.
a Black mental health provider who prefers seeing Black mental health providers when I seek out therapy, because I do believe everyone should have therapy at some point in their lives, whether you've experienced a major trauma, or just you need to work out some things in life and you need like someone to help guide you. I think therapy is something that everyone should try at least once. And being a mental health therapist who has also dealt with anxiety and depression, and also prefers to work with Black mental health providers, I know exactly how difficult it is, as far as access and equity in our communities. I also know the risk of going to a non-Black mental health therapist. And I don't want to knock down mental health professionals who are not BIPOC or not Black. But I do think that um, there is a risk, and also an increased probability of sometimes having to educate the person that you see, if they are not of your culture. And that's with any culture, like cross cultural. There are not enough books on each culture for me to be like, oh, I know exactly what you mean when you do that.
Mhm.
Especially Black culture, because it is constantly changing and morphing. We are a very creative people, and we are not a monolith, so things are always changing. But in that process, we when it comes to equity and access, we have to think about the reality of the state of the Black community right now. When it comes to economics and finances, there is a sufficient wealth gap, and we have to think about our money, our pockets. And so, choosing between a mental health appointment and maybe a hair appointment can be very difficult.
Yeah, I definitely think that is every point that you said is just right on target with like the social determinants of health. And that's something that, we definitely have to evaluate more and, working through the stigma. I feel like
Yeah.
even before we get to like, the decision making, it's kind of like culturally, how do we break the stigma that, seeking services or therapy is actually okay? It's something
Right.
that you should, look to partake in. Um,
Right. Because
yeah,
in our community, it is not foreign to hear someone associate therapy with being crazy,
yeah,
or mental illnesses with being crazy,
yeah,
having such a very negative word associated with having a mental illness. But one thing, I've been in the mental health field for over 10 years now. And when I first started, I truly felt like it was a gamble because I knew I wanted to serve our community,
yeah.
and I knew that our community was not there yet when
Mm,
it came to accepting mental health. But I think the pandemic has illuminated some things
yes.
globally for everyone. And it's a beautiful thing.
Mhm.
And it's a beautiful thing because it's not as if now people are inspired and compelled and encouraged to address some of the mental health um, conditions or illnesses that they had prior to the pandemic even being here.
Yeah.
Everyone was talking about it because being locked down was
We
really taking a toll on us mentally.
and we all had that in common, right? It was like,
Had it in common, so it was
yeah.
okay for us to say,
Mhm.
"I too feel
Me too.
like I'm going
Yeah,
crazy."
exactly. And that's like I think the icebreaker of normalizing it because now we have, everyone experience the same thing. So it's like that commonality to say, yeah, I did, I'm more aware that I was experiencing depression or my behaviors, changed due to this. And, again, like that isolation, I think everyone, had a reaction to, whether more adverse than others,
Mhm.
depending on what you were going through.
Yes.
But I definitely, when you say kind of even for me, segueing into social entrepreneurship, I have my, worries about, okay, this is something that I'm, looking to implement. And is the community ready for this in this demographic where I'm looking to provide services? Is this something that, the local community will gravitate to and welcome essentially? But, I even just with strategizing how to build the trust in the community, that's another thing we have issues with as well. And even just on as a client provider or patient provider relationship, there's trust there that you have to establish, and like you kind of have to navigate that very carefully when
Mhm.
stepping into the mental health space in an underserved community as well. So
Mhm.
there's just a lot of I guess work behind that, behind the scenes before you even bring a service forward. And really focusing on the youth, right? And
Mhm.
young people, and getting them to kind of get that normalization of, okay, I need to be more aware of my choices as a younger adult and
Mhm.
really understand that, your trajectory really early on in life, you said it, from
Yeah.
the ages of 13 to 24, like those are pivotal years.
Yeah, and I've worked for in I've worked alongside or with families with children way like more than any other type of client, like more than couples therapy and things like that. And I will say that children are very receptive to engaging with their mental health, prioritizing their mental health,
Mhm,
as long as the foundation is there. And so I am not a big advocate of individual therapy, especially with children.
mhm,
I really love seeing families. I do have individual clients. I do.
yeah,
Um, especially if that's all that you can bring, that's all I will take it.
mhm,
But when it comes to children, it's important for whatever is poured into a child to be something that can be nurtured and sustained throughout every environment that they're in.
yeah,
So, sending your child to therapy, like fix this kid, is the worst thing you could do
yeah,
because a lot of those problems start right in the house, and you might not even know exactly how you're contributing. And sometimes it could be a parent who's doing everything right, but like, on the surface, and there's just one piece that is missing, and that one piece, it once that parent is aware of what that one piece is, that it starts to immediately change the child's behavior. The parent is readjusting, and so I think, taking a holistic approach is really important when it comes to therapy as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I see that we have a question here. It says, what were the gaps that were missing in the community before the pandemic?
Okay, so if we're talking about, I guess, mental health gaps, I mean, there's a lot of different gaps.
Mm-hmm.
One gap is, and this is on providers. Some providers will misdiagnose our community.
Mm-hmm.
And they will misdiagnose our community with ADHD or bipolar or schizophrenia. Those are really sexy diagnoses for our community.
Yeah.
And it's not helpful, and I would encourage anyone who's experienced the process of being diagnosed to get a second opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And before you embrace that diagnosis for life,
Right.
to see if it's really what is needed. Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, especially with children, you might just need to be in a different setting.
Yeah.
Your school could just not be for you. Maybe it is way too strict, and it's militant, and you have a free spirit child,
Yeah.
and that
You
doesn't
know,
ADHD.
yeah, and I think too that's an important gap that that we have to address, because when you talk about the diagnosis and like the origin of it, it does start with the school system in a
Mhm.
lot of respects, and it does stigmatize a child if they are, like you said, in that strict environment from K to 12, and they're not progressing or getting other outlets,
And it could be
and
something as
it
simple
could be
as diet,
right.
like maybe
Mhm.
they just need a well-balanced diet. And if you're in a community like Harlem, where I would definitely call it a food desert, because my grocery store's produce is not all that. Like, you want to have better access to food so that your children are having well-balanced meals, so they don't have so many distractions, or they don't feel distracted when they go to school. So those are gaps that are adjacent to that holistic experience.
Mhm.
Being in food deserts, not having balanced diets, having providers misdiagnose,
Yeah.
the access to providers,
Mhm.
or the wait times for the providers. I
Mhm.
mean, a lot of times, if I'm referring a client to a psychiatrist, there might be a 6-month wait for that. And
Yeah, that's pretty standard in the healthcare system with the supply and demand. And
yeah,
psychiatry is not a growing field. Um,
yeah.
it's actually more sparse than others.
Mhm.
So it is a challenge with that from the provider side, and just like that patient provider ratio, like that's another important thing to consider too. So like that's another gap, and those are all barriers that eliminate the access.
And the wealth gap that I was
In the
also
wealth
talking
gap.
about
Yep,
earlier.
another social determinant,
I
Mhm.
I when you reach out to a therapist and you ask them about a sliding scale and income based
Fee for service.
fees, you are hoping that they'll say something reasonable, but
Mhm.
what they're considering reasonable still seems steep,
Yeah.
$75 to $99 an hour or something
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah.
And I personally am way more flexible, because this is the only community that I really want to commit my life to.
Yeah.
But when I personally am seeking out for therapists and I hear the amounts that they're charging, I'm like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
Like $200?
$150, right.
Like,
Mhm.
wow, like
Yeah.
I can be making a lot of money, but I'm not gonna
Mhm.
do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like you said, that is like, again, for just working people, that is
Mhm,
still a steep, price point
it is.
to, provide a service with, and, you have to even address insurances, right? It's a lot of different parts of this wheel that contribute to a broken system.
Mhm,
But I definitely, the cost of care
mhm,
for mental health is very high, and how we how we view it too. I think, when you talk about socioeconomic status, and the mindset of different tiers of wealth, or where you are,
Mhm.
definitely plays a part in your I guess decision making on how you go about your healthcare.
Mhm.
And like you made a statement, just like, well, do I go get my hair done, right, or do I go pay for this treatment? And like, that's a choice, right? And I think that's what it also comes down to, at sometimes as well, choosing, making a decision about
Yeah.
what
I
is
mean,
best.
and that was a real decision for me, especially in the
Mhm.
pandemic. I'm like, okay, I
Yeah,
guess I'm gonna twist my hair so I can get on this virtual therapy session for myself
yeah,
because I need this right now,
mhm, yeah,
Um, and also one thing that I think um is there are a lot of different nuances and situations that face the Black community that actually create a higher need for mental health services.
mhm,
And some of that is grief and loss. There's a lot of loss in our community. And that loss can be on a national scale. When we hear about police brutality, it is very common to have an understanding that we are all suffering, that
mhm,
we all feel little sad. When Breonna Taylor was taken from us, I
yeah,
was anxious because I was like, you just can't be a Black woman in America,
mhm,
And it's like, okay, like I can't sleep. I can't drive while being Black. I can't travel while being Black. So you can't shop while being Black. So
yeah,
there are a lot of things that cause a larger need
yeah,
in our community just due
just
to
that.
racism.
Yeah.
Just due to racism.
Yeah,
You
that's
know?
that breeds anxiety, and I think that definitely has to be a forefront of just like community relationships with the police as well,
Mhm.
and educating young people on their interactions with police too. I think sometimes too, even if you're just pulled over in a car, you could have anxiety, you can be very nervous,
Mhm.
and sometimes you don't even realize your mannerisms, your movement can trigger an adverse reaction from the police. And a
Mhm.
lot of youth aren't, aware of,
Mhm.
like, from the police perspective versus, you could be innocent, and I think those are the hard conversations that we need to have, in educating youth on, interacting with the police, how to conduct themselves. And yes, there are so many issues with that, where there isn't justice.
Yeah, and
So
I
being
think when it comes to the police, one thing that I'm hoping for is that more mental health providers are dispatched
Yes.
alongside police officers,
Mhm.
so that if police are not trained and knowledgeable enough
Yeah. Mm.
to identify someone who has a mental health need, that mental health professional can say, don't get trigger happy. Like, this
Yeah.
is a person in
Mhm.
crisis,
Yes.
this
Yes.
is a person that needs to be talked down
Mhm.
and we can manage this,
Yeah. Yeah.
because the when we think about numbers, I think it's way more difficult to plan on training our youth on how to respond or interact with police officers
With
versus how to train
with the
police to properly respond to the citizens, that they're supposed to be serving.
yeah,
Um,
both. I think both. It both needs to
yeah, and I
mhm,
think that
happen.
police officers' mental health needs to be prioritized in all of the academies and all of the precincts across
Yeah.
America. You should not be able to see certain things and then return to work the next day. You
Mhm.
know, and I'm not even talking about shooting someone because they're experiencing trauma that is not as intense as shooting someone, but you're still experiencing trauma, and
Mhm.
that trauma is going to cause you to be hyper vigilant at your job,
Yes.
and you have a duty that requires you not to be hyper vigilant
Yeah.
as you may be, you
Yeah.
know. Um,
Mhm.
and so I hope that more therapy is embedded into policing
Mm-hmm.
for the police officers
Yeah.
and for the response to the community.
Yeah. Right. And while, even while we're, wanting that to happen, I think it's definitely still important to just educate, people on their, how you interact with the police and, the do's and the don'ts and, and complying and understanding, just having more of an understanding of police interactions within the community. But it's definitely a relationship that and trust that's broken terribly
Mhm.
and needs fixing. So I think it's like both sides of the aisle. Um,
Yeah, and
Working towards
I think in New York,
settlement.
it's more so of a community that you could possibly get that type of outcome where police get to know the residents of a neighborhood and the and vice versa. The residents get to know the police of the neighborhood. Me coming from more segregated places like Chicago and Atlanta,
Mhm.
there's nothing you can train a person to do
Mhm.
to combat the racism of a police officer. And then I'm not saying there are no racist police officers in NYPD, but
Mhm.
sometimes there's a prejudice there that there's like nothing your
Right.
child can do that will make that person have
Right.
better intent with them, you know? And
Mhm.
that's one of the things that I often think about
Mhm.
because there in a lot of these tragedies, it's not that someone was conducting themselves wrong, you know.
Mhm.
It was just a police a bad egg or a bad
Mhm.
apple or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And there are more and more being produced in police precincts as long as they're not prioritizing mental health. Like they have to
Mhm.
do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think also, when we have to look within ourselves and look within our own community and look at the issues surrounding gun violence and hate crimes and, address the mental illness behind that as well. And, that's the work that we have to do because a lot of it is really, you know, unnecessary when you hear the conflicts that are going on.
Mhm.
And these are young people. As far as the gun violence statistics are concerned. And, I think too, as a community, we have to really come together, whether it's churches, organizations, like we have to kind of build a unified front in collaboration with addressing this issue. Because if we don't address each other, it's kind of like, we're kind of like just leaving, you know, it's just kind of not going to work. It's not,
Yeah,
we're not going to have progress. We're
yeah.
really not.
And
Um,
it's a tough situation
mhm,
because um you I don't yeah, I mean many people know how bad gun violence is in Chicago. And so
mhm,
seeing the rise of gun violence in New York, that it almost feels very similar to
mhm,
Chicago. It's a sad place to be in. A lot of it has to do with the economics of any community. You have parents that have to have 2 and 3 and 4 jobs, just to provide. And it leaves your child exposed to the influences of the street,
yeah.
and you're trying to do the best you can, and you have your children being pulled by forces that you really don't want them to have anything to do with.
Yeah.
And that it's a revolving door, and it's difficult, because there's so many solutions that need to happen, right? Better
Right.
pay for parents, um,
Yes.
more resources and programs for the youth,
Yeah.
all of those different things so that we can combat the increase in gun violence that's happening in our communities.
Yeah. And yep, I definitely agree 100%. And, also just getting into the solution piece, right? Where we're talking about positive change and what we can do to combat this issue. And again, from a entrepreneur perspective, I really think the work has to be done within the community, the giving back, people of the community coming back to help foster new change and innovation. And, even from the provider side, serving in the community that you grew up in, is another cultural competency strategy.
Mhm.
Where young people will say, wow, reading a bio, that's another thing. As a patient, we'll all be patients at some point, right? And the doctor you want to see, you want to know about them. You want to know their performance history, where they went to school. You want to know those things. And it's the same for mental health. I want to meet someone and get vulnerable with someone who I can relate to on multiple levels. And they are empathetic and have the tools to help me get better and make better choices and move, and progress. So I think that is like, so imperative when you're going into a sparse, underserved community like Harlem, or anywhere that's not, you don't have a continuum of care from like an intensive outpatient, inpatient setting to like a level 1 clinic. Like, I think that is another important factor where you're like bridging a gap to be a continuum of care on multiple levels. So, I think more level 1 clinics are extremely important, because you really have that, again, it kind of permeates that extreme notion that you're going to be inpatient, right? You're going to be in a crazy house and you're going to be institutionalized. And it's like, no, we can really work on, more moderate and mild diagnoses, before people, or, go, we'll say crazy, right? Or, we have more negative outcomes. And again, it's not to drive medication, it's to really start with a conversation, and give people the tools, that they need to be better and do better and make better choices. So, it is a work in progress. But, we have to all, take our part in it, and, come together. So I definitely want to get your perspective on, like, with the providing of services and the importance of peer support groups. How important has that been, or effective in your like line of work as a service you provide?
It's very important. I just did a program with Street Corner Resources and Aisha Sekou and the Kennedy Center in Harlem, Joseph P. Kennedy Center. And everyone was, and it was actually about gun violence, and everyone was able to speak on their experience with gun violence. And you mentioned how, like, being able to connect with people in the community is really important for the professionals. And I let them know, I've had several, because I'm from Chicago and that's just part of the territory. I've had several family members that I've lost due to gun violence. And I immediately had all of the youth's ears in that room. They were like, okay, like, we're here, like, tell us everything that's happening. And I was able to see an amazing transformation, not just from me, but from all of them sharing their stories and how they feel about gun violence, and of course they were being teenagers. So when they first started, some of them were like laughing and giggling, but you saw the transformation over time in that space, when everyone started to share what their experience was. And so sometimes that can be your source of therapy. Sometimes it does not look like an individual session. It does not look like going to a private practice. It could look like being in a space with peers or credible messengers who are able to pour into you and share with you what they went through. And that could save your life, especially when we're talking about our youth. Social media could save your life. There are so many amazing outlets online that just tell you different things about terms that we may have never thought of, whether it's gaslighting or medical gaslighting or manipulation or intimate partner violence. There's so many things that you can learn about without being in school, because unfortunately, there's not a psychology in high school.
Right.
Psychology 101
You don't get that till college, and then you kind of like you're not interested, right? It's not something you're
And they need it, right?
right.
They need a mental health aspect, and I see a lot of schools starting to embed wellness post pandemic, which is great.
Yes.
But they need it at every point. They need it at the point when they're 4 and 5 and tantrums are still a thing.
Yes, the early childhood development is something, that is so key.
Right.
And yes, that's so true. Yep.
They need it when they start like really forming those social groups and like playing with the opposite sex, and they need it when they start going into puberty. They need it at every stage of childhood. Like wellness and mental health have to be prioritized because they go through a lot,
Hmm.
they go through a lot, when it comes to hormones and emotions
Yes.
that, I mean, at when you're an adult, some adults will minimize it. Um, but when you reflect back on your own childhood, there was a lot of angst at times, being teenagers and things like that. And those are things that we really have to like kind of hone in on and remember so that we can empathize with them and encourage them to engage with peer groups and peer support groups.
Yes. And
So,
I definitely, with the isolation, I think that is even 10 times more important and paramount with having peer groups because of the isolation. You felt that loneliness. You relied more on social media interaction. So I think, that in-person gathering is really important. And I even speak for me, and just you could tell me if you agree as well. Like I've been in going out to restaurants now and even going to networking events, and it's so, I've been Zoom fatigued, and then just going in that space and being in the presence of people is totally different.
mhm.
That interaction, and we thrive off that, right? People's energy, how you feel, real face-to-face interaction. So I definitely think that it's important to really, like you said, it can be just a space of
Yeah,
sharing, and you
our
can be as creative with it as you need to, right?
yeah, our bodies rely on a I think it's a neurotransmitter, oxytocin. And oxytocin is most produced with proximity, like with love, with hugs,
Mm-hmm.
even a shoulder grab or a
Yes.
handshake and things like that. And during the pandemic, we were not
I
getting.
know you would just click and raise your hand like, "Hey," in the Zoom. That's not enough, right?
And then towards the end, I mean, we're still technically in the pandemic, but
Right.
towards the end of, let's say, 2021 or even the middle of 2021, I had a lot of work that I was doing on Zoom, and a lot of people did. And half the times you wanted your camera off just
Mhm.
so you could breathe and relax. You
Yep.
really wanted your key. You're like, I can't be on all the time, like
Mhm. I know everyone's watching you, right? You're so
like doing all of that.
Yes, that's so true.
And then
Mhm.
and then you start reflecting on pre-pandemic or even now where it's like, I don't even have to be that animated when you're in an actual space with someone, you're
Mhm.
just there,
You
and I
know?
might nod or do something like that, but it requires you to be even more on in the Zooms
Yeah.
because everyone gets the opportunity to look at you at all times, which is not
Yes.
natural.
Everyone's 100% attentive. Right.
Yeah, if you're with 5 or 6 people, I can't look at all 6 of them at the exact same time all
Mhm.
the time while we're there, but
Yep.
on the screen, I can just be like, oh,
Uh-huh.
look at her.
Private,
Oh, I
right?
see those eyes."
I know. I know. So it's a whole different interaction.
And it was definitely depriving us of a very important like many hormones and neurotransmitters that are essential to us feeling good about ourselves,
Yeah. Yes.
uh, and it was increasing those ones that are not good for us, the ones that compromise your immune system and make you feel sick and you don't even know why,
Yeah.
it's
Mhm.
because you're not getting that human interaction and that human touch.
Yep. Yep. And I definitely, you got to kind of be creative too. And like from a provider perspective, when you are providing services. Do you find that clients are more inclined with virtual as we're transitioning out of the pandemic? Do you see that change where clients want to be more in person? Or do you think, it's going to kind of continue in that trend where it'll stay more virtual longer than expected?
My adolescents and my adults, I would say, are really happy with virtual.
Mhm.
Um, and they're also happy to like see me in person every now and then. So I do provide that option.
Mhm.
Um, but they're happy with the convenience of it all because that's a gap that we didn't get to really talk about. But sometimes time
Yeah.
and the commute to an office makes things impossible. So
Yeah.
you choose not to go to therapy because your day is so full and there's no way you could get to therapy and take care of all your responsibilities. So
Mhm.
it actually allowed a lot of people to prioritize mental health even more through
Mhm.
the virtual settings. I saw something about introverts there. And
Huh? Yes.
initially, introverts at the beginning of the pandemic were like, I don't know what you guys are panicking about. And then many of the introverts clients were like, I am missing outside. And
Mhm.
it's the joy of being able to be a spectator from afar,
Mhm.
and like be in a space, even if you're not interacting, you
Mhm.
still are getting that human interaction or
Yes.
that human proximity
Mhm.
that feeds into your mental health,
Yeah.
and so a lot of times uh larger engagements may bring on anxiety for introverts,
Mhm.
but there are smaller engagements that actually help them and make them feel good and feed them. And
Mhm.
so extroverts and introverts both were feeling deprived of like not being able to engage with people. One of my closest peers is an introvert and I'm a germaphobe, so I was like, yeah, I guess I'll see you next year. Like, wait, what? You're the only person that I can talk. I mean, like, see face to face. I'm like, I'm not the only person. Don't count me in. Like, not doing that. And not just the germaphobe. I also
Yeah.
have pre-existing conditions, so I was
Mhm.
like all the way on the safe side. Like, I will
Mhm.
go come out for groceries. If I see you in the grocery store, I'll wave 6 feet.
Mhm. Yeah.
Please. Please.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, basically, we all started to become one and understand the struggles of the pandemic, regardless of what we were prior to the pandemic.
Right. Yeah. And another gap, just to go back with the gap, is you're right, the time and the convenience. And that's another going back to a social determinant and barrier is commuting. And how important it is to provide services in the community that are local, that are walking distance.
Mhm.
And one thing about New York, we're in the patient experience and just even the hours of operation, right? Let's like even go even deeper with time and school and work and parent and just everyday life, and wanting to meet the needs. And, it's important to really assess as an organization, and hear from the clients what those needs are. So like, speaking or just conducting surveys and saying, hey, is Saturday appointments or extended evening hours, more feasible? Because you definitely want to, hear their wants and so that you can provide the service and it's a happy relationship.
Right.
Because just from I worked in healthcare for 10 years and across all specialties, it's such a challenge, with from the provider side with rescheduling and just missed appointments, due to people just trying to think that they're going to get in and out from their, taking a lunch break. I got an hour. But, now, just the demand, a lot of times you're in the office for a couple hours,
Mhm.
and, therapy, obviously, you definitely don't want to overbook and triple book. But
Right.
just healthcare practice sometimes, that person or that just that relationship with the providers, You need that one-on-one time. You want to feel like that provider has that designated time for you, and you don't want your services to feel rushed, and you want to get what you need. So
So
that's so important.
yeah, and I
Across the board.
actually, when I was in Atlanta and here,
Mhm.
and Las Vegas, I didn't mention I lived in Las Vegas for 4 years, and that's where I started my mental health career.
Mhm.
But in all three states, I engaged in therapy services that were in the home. And so I've never done, well, now I'm doing private practice, but I'm
Mhm.
doing private practice because of virtual. And that's it. Like if I love being able to come to a client's home or family's home and at their convenience and work with them.
Wow.
So if a session needed to be at 8 a.m., I'm there at 8 a.m.
Mhm.
If it's 8 p.m., I'm there at 8 p.m.
Mhm.
Even here in Harlem, I was working through preventive therapy, and preventive therapy, for those who don't know, is to prevent your children from being placed in foster care or anything like that. So if there are behaviors or issues in the home that can be worked around or worked through, I would come in and do in-home sessions on a weekly basis. And
Mhm.
I was happy that there was a service where I could do that for our community, because even having an entire family, like 5 family members, come into an office, that's a task, you know.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, and even if they live in Harlem, like there's like 4 or 5 different train lines that you could be on just in Harlem. So
Mhm.
it's not easy. And I wanted to make sure that they had that access, and they did. I was the one jumping on all the trains, you
Yeah,
know.
that's
Uh,
amazing. Yep.
yeah, and for those families out there, I definitely encourage you look up preventive care. It's something that doesn't require. There are organizations that don't require you having like ACS involvement or things like that. So definitely take advantage of it, and I'm pretty sure I'll be able to provide my contact information if you have more questions about that. I'm not in preventive care now. I just do virtual sessions, and I also do group um, activities and presentations and seminars. But there are many great preventive care organizations that do therapy in the home, and a lot of people don't know about it.
Wow. Yeah, that's a definitely I would say just you sharing that is definitely a huge piece of outcomes and how we can nip things right in the bud before things get worse. And
Mhm.
so yes, preventive services is so
And it's free.
essential.
It's free.
Yep, that's the key plug right there. Right.
It's free. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And would you say one of the I would say another barrier or a gap with mental health, um, do you think the perspective of the types of organizations that do come into the community? Because I've gotten feedback and you get point of views and you're kind of like weighing, perspectives. And when we talk about programs and the type of programs that we implement, um, and do you think that it's important to really get the temperature of the population that you want to serve, while it will it be surveys, and really seeing what their needs are rather than kind of assuming that this you see what's available through government grants and you kind of go through that way, but kind of being more practical and hearing the voice of the community, and not making assumptions about what their needs are from a program perspective.
Yeah.
What are your takes on that?
I definitely assess the community. Uh,
Mhm.
like that's how I personally do it. Um,
Yeah.
I'm also not a $1 million business, right? And so, with those $1 million businesses, what they're doing is following the money.
Mhm.
And sometimes they come up with amazing programs, but oftentimes they're looking at the programs based on the grants. They're fulfilling what the grant is telling them they have to do,
Mhm.
opposed to assessing what the community needs. And from a provider standpoint, sometimes assessing what the community needs, for me, it's like fulfilling. Like it makes me feel good. But it may not be the most lucrative thing for a provider to do. And I think that holistically, assessing what the community needs will address a lot of the issues that we have. You know, responding to grants will always, it's going to keep us here,
Mm.
going to keep us right where we are, you know, or it's going to be so minuscule of like incremental changes where it's just like one notch, another notch slowly, while other things adversely may be happening to make it look like we're going 5 steps back, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That's a loaded response there. A lot to consider when, you know, as myself, wanting to provide services and wanting to really have high impact, right? Because like, you know, when you do follow the money, there are guidelines and restrictions, and why you know that this will be produce better outcomes, you have to make that choice, right?
I
And it's
think
not
one
sometimes
solution
not.
though is speaking to your public officials, the legislators in your community, and
Mm-hmm.
letting them know, not just as a provider, but letting those people know who have to write the laws and the bills. This is what our community needs, and we cannot serve our community based on what our community can afford and based on, you know, what we also have to afford. So like something needs to happen where we're able to do our jobs, you know. And I think that's another a pathway of advocacy beyond nonprofits and beyond the providers, like speaking to the legislators and saying this is what we need, like make some changes here in this community.
Yes, and I definitely agree with that. And, you know, just from a statistical standpoint, you know, mental health doesn't get the funding that it deserves. And now, you know, it's coming to the forefront. So, you know, we're at the cusp of change, and it's like you gotta stay informed, stay involved, and, you know, stay engaged with what's going on, you know, just in general, to really make change. So it's a task, like you said. Everything is pretty much a task, but you know, you have to, you know that it's paramount, and you got to do the work to see the change. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, you know, I think everything takes time, but it's good to like, again, you know, have these conversations from different lenses, because as a collective, we could really, you know, have high impact. And I would say, for just you as your experience, is there, you know, more of, I would say, goals that you want to aspire to as a provider? Is there different you know, lanes that you want to go because you was in different states? How is New York different from, you know, providing in the other states that you served in?
Well, there are many services here.
Mhm.
This is a place of abundance. Now, even though it's a place of abundance and resources, I still think there's a issue with access. So, you know, if you have the right people, the right resources, the right everything, there's a service out there for you. So there's still an issue
Yeah.
of the access. Whereas in other places that I've been, um, some of those services don't exist at all.
Yeah.
um, like not at all. When it comes to resources for the homeless community, the youth, for elders, there's so many things here that I have not seen in Chicago, Atlanta, or Las Vegas.
Mhm.
Uh, that, you know, I'm like, wow, that's great that they took a concept and they brought it to life. Now
Mhm.
they just need to give it to the people, you know. And so for me, I definitely, the reason why I transitioned out of preventive care is because I personally wanted to reach more people. And preventive care is so amazing that you can really only have 5 families at a time.
Mm.
because they want you to pour into those families. So I think it's a very beautiful service.
Yeah.
But me being in preventive care and me wanting to feel more fulfilled by reaching more people in the community is actually what led me to start my business, Black Wellness Initiative, and creating wellness boxes that were really speaking to our community, creating COVID care packages that speak to our community, and made also inspired me to start the Mind Over Melanin podcast, because the Mind Over Melanin podcast is not just a, hey, what y'all doing? You know, it's
Let's
a
have real conversations, right?
it's real conversations that teach people about some therapeutic skills, teach people about psychological components. It lets people know that, you know, if you go into a store and you feel paranoid, it's not just you. You know, there's an actual concept about what you're experiencing right now. And it's impacting your body. And, you know, it exists. And this is how you manage those type of things, you know? And so, you know, when I see the viewers and the listeners increase over weeks and months, it makes me feel like, okay, I'm getting to more people than the 5 people who I was getting to at that one time, even though I love serving the families.
Yeah.
And even the individual therapy I do now. Preventive care was so abundant in the services they provided that I could do maybe 3 sessions a day. But when I'm doing virtual sessions, I can reach more people because it's not me commuting, you know, to different people. And I can, you know, speak to 4 or 5 people as long as my mental health is intact.
Right. Yeah. And how important is that too? I mean, we talk about self-care and just wellness, right? The whole being, and how that's not, you know, it's all connected. And that's so important.
Very important.
Provider. And how do you do wellness for you?
Um, it's actually transformed big time during the pandemic because I liked tea prior, but now I love tea.
Yeah.
I never even engaged with sage, like burning sage and meditating, and I was good for a bath. I was, but I amped up my baths like
Yeah.
way more, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so those type of things were things that I was doing, and now I'm even working on getting certified as a like trauma informed yoga instructor.
Wow.
Because I want to bring that component into therapy when, especially when I'm working with children,
Yes.
so that they can learn those type of things, you know.
Those are great skills, and that's another part of you know, even at RCM, wanting to have that those modalities in conjunction with the therapy, because it really transforms a person when they can learn those types of skills of just quieting your mind, you know, calming, knowing how to calm down when you are triggered, like these techniques, just breathing. Sometimes people we have to learn how to breathe, right? And so, yeah, those are like all important. And the work that you've done from the preventative space and in your entrepreneurship as a business owner is equally important and equally abundant. To make no mistake about it. But I definitely, you know, I understand your perspective on like impact and wanting to touch more lives. And you know, that is, you know, it's amazing. And you know, as an artist, as a nonprofit startup as well, it's kind of just like we want to have high impact. We want to touch as many people as possible, because that's where the healing and transformation really happens, when you have communities of young kids that go to the same school, right? They're from the same building, you know, they're neighbors, and they're having experiences like this together, and they're healing and they're relating to each other in a positive, safe space. Like that transcends, you know, that's the difference maker, you know. So I just want to say, like, you know, you're amazing, and thank you for what you do. You're inspiring me. as well, just having this conversation and being on this platform. And I hope everyone listening is inspired as well in some way, shape, or form to think about themselves, think about their loved ones, think about a young person they may know that, could need a service, or just give a nice word, right? Ask them how they're doing today. Ask them how they felt today, or, just anything, any positive interaction to connect with someone on a level of understanding and empathy is everything.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one thing that motivated me to even get into mental health, even though I thought it was a gamble,
Mhm.
was me being severely bullied as a youth, and thinking to myself, you never know what anyone's going through, you
Yeah.
know? And later on, I learned what my bullies were going through.
Yeah.
And that helped me,
Mhm.
even though it didn't help me in the moment, like
Right.
it helped me with what I was going through, like feeling
Mhm.
suicidal and those type of things. That that factor of not knowing what people are going through is something we should always consider, because we all need to be kind to one another. And
Yeah.
there's always work to do, like there's always a mission and a purpose for everyone out there, because there are voids. There are things that people need, and each one of us can fulfill those things,
Yeah.
like within ourselves and outwardly.
Yes, I definitely agree. Do you have any, you can tell everyone where to find you. We're about to wrap up here. We have a few minutes left. So if you want to have a closing statement and just, just if everyone's jumping on late, just tell them what you do and where they can find you.
So, again, I am a marriage and family therapist. I'm also a small business owner of a wellness brand, Black Wellness Initiative. And Black Wellness Initiative provides wellness boxes. And it's at blackwellnessinitiative.com, or you can find the wellness boxes on Etsy, or Instagram at Black Wellness Initiative as well. And I'm also a podcaster and a consultant. The podcast is Mind Over Melanin, and you can find that at mindovermelanin.com or anywhere you listen to podcasts. We're on all the platforms. And lastly, I mentioned being a consultant. I do seminars about mental health. So if you ever need me to speak to a group, you can definitely reach out to me on either blackwellnessinitiative.com or mindovermelanin.com. And I'll be more than happy to organize something where I can show up. I have a few speaking engagements that I've done recently, as I mentioned, with uh, Street Corner Resources, and I'm scheduled for a few panels. So I'm excited about those things, and they're definitely up and coming things that I'm doing. So you can stay tuned by just checking me out on mindovermelanin.com.
Perfect. We have a little comment here. I'm just going to read, but we are running out of time. So we have to address the generational trauma that has haunted our society and crippled the mental health of Black, brown, red, and white peoples of America. And until that is addressed in an honest and unbiased way, America will continue to burn with crime and a dysfunctional society that is so earnestly being captivating. And then I get to see the rest. Okay. But
So,
yes, that's a loaded comment. And yes, we definitely have to address racism and the
mhm,
biases that we experience day to day.
mhm,
That is constant, a constant struggle that we all face. And we have to definitely take more of a humanistic approach, and really, find that, understand that we're more alike than different.
mhm,
And that's been a challenge across every generation. We had civil rights, we had, the drug epidemic. We had so much, and now COVID. I'm speaking from the Black community's perspective and
mhm,
how we kind of see the world and how we show up in it, and how we're treated. But I definitely think that it's a call for unity, and to really learn from the past, right? Because a lot of it is cyclical. It kind of just metamorphs into something else, but it's like the same underlying issue. Um,
yeah, and I think acknowledging the past is a real
Acknowledging,
thing,
right?
because the generational trauma is actually expanding if people keep
Keep it.
ignoring. what has happened. And I'm not just talking about in our community, but nationally. Like, people need to acknowledge everything that the people of color have been through in this country.
Yes. So yeah, that that's a great point to make. And I'm just going to close here. Thank you, Bailey, again. Thank you for everyone who's listening. I hope you enjoy our conversation. I'm Corinthia Benison, founder of Renaissance Center of Mastery, RCM for short. We are a nonprofit startup delivering mental health services to the Harlem communities. Youth and families 12 to 24. We are looking to, in the process of raising funds now, to provide services, hopefully fourth quarter of 2022, if not top of 2023. You gotta, I keep you all updated. We have a lot going on. It's a lot of moving parts. So just stay tuned with our journey. You can find us on social media, Instagram, RCMX Social Justice. Facebook is the same, RCMX Social Justice. And our website, www.rcmx Social Justice. Thank you for tuning in tonight, and everyone have a blessed evening. And I'll be back next week, same time, same place.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.